Well, welcome everybody to the second PFF session of the fall. I'm Chris Osgood. I co-chair PFF with Dr. Lee Yusuf, who is on the internet with our the folks who are joining us via WebEx. In the past, we've had sessions like this focusing on journal publications and more routine or familiar types of scholarly activity. We thought it would be fun this year to focus instead on people who publish books. And so we've assembled a distinguished collection of authors from across our campus representing different disciplines. I'm going to briefly introduce them. Their accomplishments are many, and I don't mean to diminish them in any way, but I want to give them plenty of time to share their expertise with us. So we have Mike Pearson from Arts and Letters and the Department of English. Looking at the website, I find Mike published his first book in 1991 and has a seventh book coming out this spring, I guess a series of memoirs called Reading Life, so quite an accomplished publisher. Professor Bill Judge comes from business, where he specializes in strategic leadership. If I count correctly, he has 3 books on his various areas of expertise. In addition, he serves as an editorial reviewer for a number of distinguished journals. Professor Adrian Gheorghe comes from engineering, specifically systems engineering. And again, if I've not miscounted, he has at least 2 books related to his areas of specialty. My apologies to anybody if I get the facts wrong, and please correct me. We also have Dr. Bryan Porter from psychology and now the Associate Dean for the Graduate School. Bryan's work focuses on public health and specifically driving habits, and I understand that he's working on his first book on driverless vehicles that will hopefully come to press in the next year or so. And finally, from the library, we have Ms. Corey Marsh, who is described as the Scholarly Communications and Collection Development Services Director. And Corey is going to talk to us about a number of practical issues, including copyright, particularly in the world of open access, and the important topic, particularly in the digital domain, of predatory publishers. So I think these will be very interesting and informative talks. I'm going to sort of start the conversation, but I suspect it will then acquire some momentum of its own and move in a different direction based on your comments and your interests. I'm sure all the panel members will invite your questions at any point during the afternoon. So perhaps maybe as the first question, I'd like our panelists to discuss why one might choose to publish a book as opposed or in addition to conventional scholarly publications in journals. What are the factors that you take into account in deciding whether this is the best investment of your time, or whether as a new faculty member, as some of you will be, your time is better spent elsewhere? And if we could just start, Mike, do you have a...
Yeah, I mean, I'll start because I've got a little spiel here that's written out, and I brought 4 books with me of mine, and actually, Reading Life came out last spring, but that's okay.
Sorry.
You're with the rest of the world who's really hasn't read it, but that's okay. At any rate, I brought these books here because if anybody wants a book, I'll just give them. So if anybody wants one of these, I don't want you to fight over them or fighting in the streets or whatever. But the first 4 who step up,
English pros,
can take one. Well, no, don't use it as a doorstop, please. Right. And don't do what one person did to me years ago. That is, I gave her a book for helping out with the literary festival. This is many years ago, and I went to give a reading out in Colorado at a bookstore in Denver, and somebody came up with 2 of my books. One of them was signed to that person. So she sold it on eBay, but I hope she made some good money from it. But anyway, what I want to say is that probably I'm the outlier in this group, and I may turn out to be the exception that proves the rule, whatever rule comes from this, from this conversation. And I think generally, Chris, I'm going to sort of, the notes I have down here take me a couple of minutes, and I think it's going to respond to your question. I always wanted to be a creative writer, but I grew up in a sort of with lower middle class values in the Bronx, and decided that being a professor was a more defensible proposition than living in a garret in Greenwich Village. And I think both my mother and my wife and our baby son appreciated that reasoning at that point in time. So doing this, which I love, teaching, but doing this was maybe the less romantic alternative to doing what I really wanted to do, which was, get drunk and, as I said, be in Greenwich Village and write during the day. But I started as a scholar of sorts, so I have a PhD in American literature, but I started to write for newspapers and magazines when I was teaching high school English. I was hired at ODU. I'm jumping over lots of my career, but I was hired at ODU, and I've been here for nearly 30 years. But I was hired here to teach journalism, which I think is sort of interesting because I had never taken a journalism class in my life. And I taught some journalism, but mainly I had written for newspapers and magazines, so they assumed that I thus knew how to tell other people what to do. And but so again, as I said, I've been here for about 29 years, and at the beginning at ODU, I started to straddle two worlds, and that was the scholarly and the creative. And my first book, as you mentioned, was in 1991 when I was here. A couple of years into my time here, was titled Imagine Places, which is up here. My subtitle is Journeys into Literary America, and it's sort of scholarly because it's about 6 writers and their connection to various places in America, like Robert Frost in Vermont, etc. But it was really a piece of journalism. So it was really a piece going out, talking to people, and sort of placing these writers in the context of the real world. My next book in 1994, A Place That's Known, was a collection of essays. Then I did write what could be construed as a scholarly book. Practically saying that as if I'm ashamed of it, but it could be construed as a scholarly book, and it was on John McPhee. Has anybody read John McPhee? Anybody know? Know the name? I mean, really, one of the most famous sort of writers of creative nonfiction or new journalism that we have, still alive and doing that work. So that book, even though it was scholarly, I got to meet McPhee, interview him, and write. So it's a little biographical as much as anything else. Then I wrote in 1999 a memoir, which I think is here amidst this group, called Dreaming of Columbus, A Boyhood in the Bronx. So it's about growing up in the Bronx. Then I wrote a novel in 2003, Shohola Falls. It's in there. Then in 2008, I wrote this book titled Innocents Abroad 2, Journeys Around the World on Semester at Sea. And some of you have heard of Semester at Sea, probably, but it was a travel narrative. But it's a travel narrative in which I connect, along the way, writers to places at times, although most of that book is about the misbehavior of undergraduates as they circle the world, and they gave me plenty to write about. And then 2015, Reading Life is sort of a memoir, but it's a memoir in books. So it's tracking of my life in terms of the books that were important to me. It would be like if you wrote about your life in terms of the songs that you connect to. 1985, what that song was. 2001, what that song was, etc. So I've got a weird career, is sort of what I'm going back to the outlier business. There seems to be little rhyme or reason or pattern to my publishing career, in terms of grand plan or calculated design. But I am getting to a point here. Rather, I wrote because I was driven by some hidden beast to write. I thought little or not at all about tenure, and this might sound like self-serving or self-congratulatory or stupid. I don't know. It depends upon your point of view on this, but I'm just sort of giving you my experience. So I thought little about tenure, even though I had 3 kids and family to support. I was lucky, I think. I wrote what I felt pressed to write, and it ended up giving me job security in the academy, but I never wrote with a tenure committee in mind. I wrote with an ideal reader in my head. In the process, I shifted ground from journalism to American literature to creative writing. I guess what I'm saying is I'm like William Stafford, the poet William Stafford's narrator who's traveling through the dark. But by following my instinct for the kind of writing I love, I ended up being the place I intended to be. So the whole theme that little diatribe was simply this, that although it might not be the best advice for any academic to give any up-and-coming academics, I guess the advice that I'm offering is the same I would give to my own sons, and that is do what you love. Find something you love and then pursue that really hard, and I think everything will work out. Or at least that's the way it did for me. And right before I came here, I was at Auburn University, and they made me the assistant director of the Writing Center. I hope nobody works in the Writing Center here, but I'm not putting them down. I think they serve a great function. But this person who was in charge of the Writing Center said to me, you can get a job like this, as director of a Writing Center. And I went home and I thought about it. I talked to my wife and I said, I could get that job, he says. But then I said to myself, I don't really want that job. That's not what I want to do. So in a way, I found a way to do something that I love and make, sort of practically make my own position here. So I'll stop with that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike, for starting us off. And one thing I picked up on as you went through your history of writing is that one of the things you might look at as a benefit is you got to meet people, at least in one context. You interviewed experts or people of interest to you in terms of your next book.
Absolutely.
And maybe that's a real plus, is that a younger person, perhaps not with as much recognition, name factor, et cetera, might in fact make some contacts by doing interviews with folks and then pulling that together into a book, if that fits your agenda.
Plus, I learned a lot who teaches you to be a writer or a researcher? I learned a lot from talking to John McPhee about the nature of a certain kind of nonfiction writing. There's no question about it. But I think the best teachers that I've had in my life, I've had some actual human beings in the classroom, but the best teachers I've had in my life have been books. So the people who have taught me how to write are writers.
Bill, do you want to weigh in?
Sure. So, first point I'd make is you need to know your disciplinary norms. And in some disciplines, books are highly valued. In some, they're not valued at all. And in my discipline, they're valued, but only later on in your career. So if anyone goes through a business school and writes a book pre-tenure, that is a negative on your career, on your evaluation. That's viewed negatively. I've written 3 books. They've had absolutely zero influence on how I've been appraised in the marketplace and how I've done it, but I've written them anyway. And so that raises the question, why do you do it? In the business world, in the business schools, it's all about peer-reviewed articles early, in the middle, and the late part of your career. I mean, that is far and away the most important research output. Producing research that peers review and evaluate to be a contribution to the knowledge. The advantage of books is you don't have peer review. That's also its biggest disadvantage. The advantage is you're not constrained by space. You're not constrained by what others already think. You get a chance to break disciplinary boundaries, explore new subjects. And I think that's one of the beauties of tenure, that allows your mind to roam a little bit, to try new subjects. And in fact, that's what I did. I wrote my first book after becoming an associate professor, and the second book after I became a full professor, and my third book after I became an endowed chair. So each was spaced out about 5 years on topics that I had an interest in. I knew would have no direct beneficial effect, but it had some very beneficial indirect effects, like forcing me to read some things I wouldn't normally do, like exploring topics that were brand new to me, that were interesting just to me, not so much to people in my discipline. And also, it's been interesting to note, in the business world, we have 2 constituencies. We have other business school professors that we're trying to write to, and business executives. It's been fascinating to me to observe. I've produced over 50 scholarly, refereed, peer-reviewed articles. That means nothing to business executives, but the fact that I've written several books, they sit up and take notice. So executives can relate to books, they can't relate to scholarly, refereed things. So I think that I would just emphasize it's very discipline specific. And it's really important if you embark on writing a book that you know, not that you always have to do what your discipline norms are, but you should know what your norms are before you engage in something like that. And if you engage in it without knowing the norms, you do so at great peril. So let me just stop there.
Thank you. Thank you. Good points. Adrian, what's your perspective on this as
Yes, thank you.
a technical man?
Yes, I'm with College of Engineering, so I'm going to speak a little bit from the perspective of engineering. And by the way, you mentioned that I wrote 2 books. It's an error by 1 order of magnitude.
Okay.
So, but it doesn't matter.
Okay, sorry.
It doesn't matter. So I speak engineering. I didn't say how many books I wrote. I said. So I think it's a very interesting discussion because, I agree with my colleagues and they come from different perspectives. They are Americans, I don't know, living in New York or something else. I come from other continents. And then at some point in time, because my work, I had to go on many continents. And I had to understand people from different perspectives. So because of this order of magnitude, it comes also because I come from Europe and I think it was important in my previous activities. People, they said, if you don't have a book, it means you don't express yourself. And now we are a little bit hypocrite here, okay? Because of the system, put it that way. I don't know, just all the professors here, whoever, they teach from other people's books. Okay, that's simple as that. Now I'm warned by bookstore here. Where are the references, things you have to give to the students next semester? No, I say no. It is my ISI paper, 3 pages, and so on and so forth. So really, is that what you want to teach them from? So you see how it is. In our department, sometimes he said, yeah, but if you teach from other people's book, what is your opinion on this subject? Because you are in that chair on a topic which is brand new, how you guide people and so on. So then coming from my experience before, in Romania, for instance, right, where it was important to, I will not say to have books, but it was an important in the environment where you are living. I remember that I wrote the first book in Romanian, in the academic publishing house, and I had some fight with the reviewers and things for some reasons, okay? But then the book was selected while I was in Romania by John Wiley to be translated into English. So after the book came into English by John Wiley, so my head of department at that time, he said, Adrian, I don't have any control on you anymore. You are free. You see how it was, it's not because I publish a paper. On the other side, publishing a book or something, yesterday I gave another presentation in our department, and I said that some colleagues in Switzerland, because I work in ETH Zurich, she was in linguistic department or something similar to you, and she did a PhD thesis about obituaries. So she was interested to find out, how people write obituaries in the newspaper and what it means and so on. That makes me to say, on your obituary, you are never going to write, and somebody said, I've written 15 paper ISI and things like this, but people will say, they wrote books, or they would say, he wrote or she wrote that book, which really make of interest, people to look into the a book like our colleague brought it, it's something summarizing things, putting things together, and I think that it's important not to represent, but I see from my children. Okay, sometimes they said, "You humiliate us because you wrote that and you try to be somebody," and said, "Why humiliate you? I help you to some extent." But then in time, they are happy to say, as you mentioned, my father wrote a book. Look what it is. It was his contribution or her contribution, maybe yes, maybe not. But that I think it's an important thing to highlight. How you are viewed in the family, because you take a lot of time. You have to read a lot. You have to. In the beginning, you might have different ideas, and then you have to disagree with them when you write, and so you have to build up books. Then it came the possibility to start to be asked to be editor of journals, which is another topic, and I'm going to say a little bit about that. And then accidentally, in a meeting in Puerto Rico, one person working with Kluwer publishing house by that time, now which became Springer. So he said, "Adrian, would you like to be the editor of this line of topics on risk, reliability, quality, and safety? Very complicated things and so on." So I said, "Why did you come to me? Because, I follow you, what you did, and the way you speak, and different meetings and so on, and I would like you to be that." Okay, let's try. That is not a simple thing from the side of being an editor. And of course, if you start to be an editor, it's not really that the books coming to you for accepting in that particular series, they are not peer reviewed. The first peer review is from the editor of that series, okay? I receive a lot of books from all over the world, but then I said, no, that cannot be because of the content, because of the quality, and so on. I shared that with other people. And sometimes, people are very unhappy because, you say that. Not to say about journals. I have quite a lot. There are new journals, not only, journals on new topics. And I receive sometimes of, a letter, an email from somebody, "Is your journal the best in the world? Because I have a paper, I have in mind about a paper, and I would like to see where to write it." I said, "That's great, fantastic, And so if you are not H index 28.5, no, but who are you? I'm just a doctoral student in the first. I have nothing to blame doctoral student, but I am that. And we have even in my environment, some of the students, they say, "Oh, if I don't publish in the best journals and with a Nobel Prize laureate, so no, I should not publish." Really? So you see, the problem has to go slowly, In German, they have an expression, "langsam, langsam, aber sicher." Series of books, which really creates a new responsibility and a new way to promote things, and even sometimes asking people to write, because some of them will say, "Why to write?" But then when they start writing and having a book, they are very happy. I would not say that always your colleagues or environment, it's very happy to see you publish a book. And I tell you from my experience, I thought that I do something good, trying to promote the department, the institution, because when you write the book, it's not written, where you live, Norfolk on the right-hand side. No, it's written Old Dominion or wherever you are living. And an institution sometimes in Romania where I try to highlight things, I put on a window. So not me, the dean put on the window, that the book and things like this. Next day it was vandalized. It was very interesting. It was a lesson for me. Say, keep a low profile, because that's it. You see, it's very important. You came with all the books. Congratulations, I agree. Maybe here we are in a different environment, more competitive. But sometimes people, I didn't know who did it, and I care a little bit. But then I learned the lesson, as I said, keep a low profile. It doesn't matter. So that is a collateral damage, so to speak, by writing books, okay? And I think that, you see, now, wrote a book, editing, they're also writing a lot of book on energy security. We know that we work sometime in the same field. And the editor, Kluver, together with NATO, because the book under NATO sponsorship, they were approached in China to be translated in Chinese, but it was approached by a reputable publishing house in China. And when I said to some people here, that's going to be, we know, Chinese, they copy everything. You see, that's another way of looking. I said, I'm sorry, it's not they are paying money to Springer, and that it was a contract. So it was not under the table, did the things and so on. So it was a process, legalized marijuana or whatever. And that was very interesting for me also to see here through an expression, through verbal things. It was a little bit, I would not say, I don't take it personally, by the way. But it is what we call sometimes mentality. The mentality is very important. I understand that one of my ex-students, he's still doing a PhD on mentality. What is mentality? Not culture, because I had a discussion. Mentality, okay? So that I gave you example of mentality in Romania so many years ago. They vandalized the book and things like this. I gave you another mentality here. Chinese copy everything. They even didn't say, but what was the book about? What is the thing? Which doesn't matter. So, as I sometimes joke with my students, my colleagues, it's like, live now, die later.
Good advice. Thank you so much. That's very useful. Brian, you just decided to jump into the pool, as I understand it.
Well, bits and pieces, and I'll be quick because we've been on this question for 30 minutes, Chris, and you can see how complicated it is. My colleagues, just to add on to them, I'm a psychologist in the sciences, and you absolutely don't want to do this until you get tenure. Don't do it. So maybe there's some disciplines where you would want to. That's good advice. Second, don't do it unless you have, in my plan, unless you have a strategic reason for doing it. In my case, I got tenure. Shortly after that, I got asked to run an international conference. That took 3 years of my life. That put me in contact with people that trusted that I could actually write an edited book. That was my first book. An edited book, a handbook of my field that had never been done before, and no one thought it could be done, and it got done. 35 chapters, authors from 12 countries. I single-edited that thing. That led to an editor-in-chief of a peer-reviewed journal, which then led to a little bit of clout. So when I got pissed off one day about the whole movement towards autonomous vehicles and how this rush headlong by engineers, no offense to my engineering friends, where absolutely no consideration of human behavior or processes, I had a publisher say, I want you to write a book. What do you want me to write it on? I don't care. What are you passionate about? I had that reputation by that time. And I said, this makes me mad. And they said, let's write a book. And the contract came 2 months ago. So I'm now writing my first solo authored book. And by the way, the conference, the edited book, the journalship put me at the world level. That got me promoted to full professor, because to be full professor, you must have an international reputation. and you probably need to bring in a lot of grants too in the sciences, but you have to have an international reputation. And one of my external letter writers actually wrote about me. He has become the gatekeeper of the field. And those things, writing the book, editing the journal, running the conference, my opinion became a filter for the field. Now, I'm not bragging about that, but that certainly helps you gain a reputation. And the last thing I'll say, we'll move on, Chris, is that at least in psychology, in my research, I'm in the public a lot. I've done policy, I do community interventions, I work with media, I work with tons of different groups around the Commonwealth, in the country, and heck, the world. So when the media wants to know who's an expert, they don't read journal articles. I don't know how many times now I get queries from journalists wanting me as the world expert on traffic psychology, gosh help them, on any little field just because I edited a book. And actually, I spend more of my time now farming out journalists to colleagues. So once again, that gatekeeper role. So now I have relationships with people that I'm helping to promote their research, and the journalists trust me to find good sources for them. So if you have a field where you have to make that outreach, you have to get out of the ivory tower, you depend upon the public, that's the strategy of writing the book. Reaching out. That's what gets you that exposure. So that's all I'm going to say. Everything else these gentlemen said are absolutely correct. And my 7 books? Yeah, maybe by the time I retire. But anyway.
You can have one. Well,
Oh, thanks. Autograph one for me, would you?
Very briefly. I have to admit, I've written dozens of book chapters, never a book. I published a number of articles as a result of disseminating research projects, directly related to disseminating research. Now I spend much more time in editing, being an editor, as you say, in international publications or conferences. And a lot of time as a reviewer, and we'll be talking more about reviewing shortly. I wanted to reiterate what they've been saying. I firmly believe that whether you publish a book or article is dependent on your department and your discipline. Almost everyone I know in history and literature publishes books. Right. And that's not to say they don't publish articles, but they're very targeted in research areas. I do have a difference of opinion to what Professor Judge said. Perhaps in business the books are not peer-reviewed, but there are many publishers who do provide peer review for books, specifically in university presses, and every single textbook is peer-reviewed by a very large board. One other thing I wanted to add, especially for graduate students, and this relates to what Mike said about if you're writing, you need to write about and research what you're passionate about, what you love. Given that, if you love your thesis or dissertation and you want to publish it, then you need to think about a lot of different factors. And the first person that you need to talk with is Karen Vaughan, located in the middle of the room, because Karen is the manager to archive your theses and dissertations at ODU, and you need to protect your thesis or dissertation for a temporary time until you're able to publish that work. So that's why I wanted to mention it, that either one of us can help you with those circumstances. But I know I've worked with a number of graduate students over the decades, and we know that you need to protect your work, whether it's your dissertation or a patent situation, so that you can pursue those other rewards, and we can help you with that.
Can I say one just statement? Because what the lady said, I think I had somebody in my life, professional life, when he said, if you want to understand very well and to make clear what you want to say about the subject, better write the book.
And I just want to come in on some of this stuff too. At first I was going to take exception with what Bill said about peer reviewing, but I was thinking, I'm up here. What is it? What are you hearing in the audience there, and I think what you should be hearing is that this is not a homogeneous world; it's a heterogeneous one. And so that was, I think, an apt point that Bill brought up, and that is that depending upon your discipline, you should think in terms of books or articles. But even in the English department, and even in arts and letters, this issue comes up. This question comes up. Which should I go after? I'm a young faculty member. I'm moving toward tenure. And I think there is a danger in writing a book. The danger is it takes a long time. And, you can get tenure. X number of articles can get you tenure. But, sometimes people think, an article, I can get that out a lot quicker than I can a book. And sometimes it seems that it takes an endless amount of time for an article to be accepted and then actually come out. So I think, you have to gauge, weigh the dangers involved there. But in terms of the concept of peer review stuff, and you're sort of getting a little bit like an inside look at like a graduate faculty committee, in a way. And I've been on enough of those that I know that we have differences of opinion, and sometimes it's like we're speaking different languages. I think we're getting better now in arts and letters, but I remember years ago, because I directed the creative writing program for 10 years, and I remember vividly one moment where we were discussing whether or not to give graduate certification to a faculty member, and one of the issues was this issue of, was this a peer review article? Well, it was in the New Yorker, for God's sake. And so I'm sort of like, I was dumbfounded, and I was like, it's the New Yorker. I mean, 1 out of 50,000.
It wouldn't help a scientist.
I get it. So, so sometimes people are working with this sort of, this ritualistic, notion that they have, and, you have to, somehow you're stunned and feel as if you're trying to explain something in a language that somebody else can't understand. But anyway, so we still have those debates. But when you write a book, I think it is peer reviewed. As Corey was saying, of course, if it's an academic or university publisher, they send out the manuscript to people, and it's vetted that way. But I would say, look, if you're publishing something with Farrar-Giroux or Norton, I mean, I personally would argue, and I have over many years here, that that's about as peer reviewed as you want to get anyway. And so that battle goes on, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, I've heard briefly from talking with Bryan that there's more to writing a book than simply presenting your text and saying, I'm done. Thank you very much. When will it appear in press? But they actually want you to do a lot more than that, Bryan. Could you talk a little bit about what kinds of additional duties you've got as an author?
Well, I mean, any book, at least in book proposals I've been dealing with, you're always asking, always offering the publisher how you're going to help promote it. So publishers have marketing plans, but you should also think how you market it. So I leave the professional marketing to them, but I have it on my own website. I talk about it. I stay in contact with those authors. It is something that, I don't know how many people I've said, just grab the book, go to that chapter, and there's your starting point in different places. So I think a lot of, at least my edited volume, the book opened doors for people to find me. And then they found me. And then I had to be responsible on behalf of the field to represent the field and help those people. Mm-hmm. And in a way that cycle back to also promote the book. But again, I found myself promoting the field and my colleagues as much. And that kind of collaboration, I mean, I have great friends around the world now. It's amazing how many people will come hear me speak at conferences now because I edited that book and because I'm the editor of the journal that they all publish in. That's really right there. Then all of a sudden, people want to listen to you. And again, the whole, what does it take to do this discipline? My biggest talk in Australia this summer was literally me as the editor of the journal saying, this is what we want to see. The room was 40 people in the room. So all of a sudden, you have that weight of responsibility to promote the work in the field. I cannot separate the work from the discipline, at least in how I've written so far. Maybe with this new self-driving book, that's really my voice, my concern, my issues. That may become different, where I'll feel a little bit more comfortable speaking as Bryan Porter, not as the editor of this discipline called traffic psychology, where there's all these different viewpoints, and I have to be respectful. And I still am always to all, but I have to represent all in that field.
Sure.
Yeah.
If I could point out one thing, and I think it's flirted through a couple of the speakers' talks here, it's really important to emphasize there's different types of books.
Yeah.
So you have textbooks and you have trade books. So textbooks are meant to teach in the classroom and whatnot, and quite frankly, that's a very lucrative market. And I have some colleagues who make over $100,000 a year having a well-accepted textbook. So, there's some monetary benefits to doing textbooks. In general, trade books don't pay very well. They don't sell very well, but people still write them. You have academic versus practitioner books. So you're trying to influence the thinking of your peers, the other academics, or you're trying to influence the minds of practitioners, people in your discipline that practice what you're doing. And then you have edited versus solo books. Edited books are when you get together a collection of other academics to look at a topic, and they all offer their different views. And then you've got the solo author thing, where it's solely you and your co-author's view on whatever is the topic. So we're talking about books. There's a lot of different types of books. From my experience, the only one that provides significant monetary benefit are textbooks, basically, if it gets adopted.
Right.
And I'll chime in on that as somebody who's written a lot of books that haven't made much money at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll underscore what you're saying. Yeah, the books that I've written are sort of for a general readership, I would say. So that's true.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, I mean, when you publish an article, you sign over copyrights to the publisher, and they take in whatever royalties that come with that. If you write a book, typically you negotiate a percentage, and it varies by discipline. Generally anywhere 7, 12, 15% comes back to the writer of that book. And then as they sell, they send you back your royalties. So if you're curious about, so it can really add up if you have a healthy royalty and the publisher really sells it and there's a big market for it.
Yeah.
And
We'll talk about
these
the
kind of books
business,
you get in advance, generally. That's the way that
nice.
works, and then the
Yeah.
royalties come. But I just want to say something about what Bryan was saying. That is, over 25 years of writing books, what I've seen is this, that publishers are asking writers to do more and more and more of the marketing, and they're offering less and less and less of, we'll pay for you to go on this book tour, that kind of thing. So two little recent examples. I had somebody who was really doing pretty well and had gotten big advances, 6-figure advances, and that person was talking to a group of agents about some up-and-coming writers, and this one agent said, I would not take on a new client that did not have 10,000 Twitter followers. Right away I said, I'd better get a Twitter account.
Thinking the same thing.
Right. So at any rate, they sort of the marketing bottom line is a lot stronger, and there's you always had to fill out a marketing questionnaire when you get a book contract. So they're always asking you, who is this book competing with, and where can it be reviewed, and blah blah blah, and things of that sort. But now it really seems like they want you to tweet and to Facebook and to get a 3-man band together and play outside, restaurants and stuff. And I'm not talking about mid-league writers. I'm talking about even, other than the John Grishams, but even those people will be required sort of probably to be on certain talk shows, et cetera. So there's a lot of work that goes into it. And I saw one of our writers who graduated from the MFA program who had 2 bestsellers, young adult bestsellers on the New York Times, Sarah McCoy. She looked beleaguered the last time I spoke to her. She just looked like writing is the least of it. It's the tweeting and all the other stuff that they're asking her to do and expect her to do all the time. So,
Wow. Adrian, I think you had a comment to offer?
Yes, I wanted to, I think there are two perspectives, and you already mentioned this. Is the perspective of an author writing a book, almost three perspectives. It's about the publishing house, and I think in between sometimes it is my situation, so I can say when you are an editor of a series, I think that's very difficult sometimes, to manage, to even to adopt edited books, as you are saying, but also how to please the editor, because for them it's a business, as you try to highlight indirectly. For them it's a business, and the kind of publishing houses where I wrote things, the books are very expensive. And my students, now I have to behave myself, because until now I gave books, which I am teaching from, some of my books, and they said, too expensive, that book. It's $225 a book. And if you have to take volume 1 and volume 2, we are devastated. But sometimes the problem is not so, because if they are in the military things, they get the money for that, and then they finish the class and they sell it. Immoral, because these are taxpayers' money, so to speak. Put it that way. I'm looking from this ethical perspective. But nevertheless, sometimes it's like that. Because of the prices of these publishing houses, they have to invest a lot in advertising and whatever it goes on. So some of the editors, they said, if 50 copies of that book will be sold, so we are break even. 50 copies. So in the engineering field, I'm not talking about. Sometimes they came to me, one editor, when I was in Zurich, in Switzerland, they said, I decided to come to you because your current book was sold in 250 copies, that you are a very good author for us, okay? So you see how they talk to you. It was not content or something like that. So now when you are an editor, you have to balance all the things like this, because it's an important business proposition, so to speak. For the authors, he doesn't say that. He doesn't see that. The author is happy, thinks to have, but behind the scene, you have to manage. You have to do the things appropriately and so on. So I try to give you a perspective from the serious editor point of view. And then in my series and then I have to work a lot. I have to go to you. Are you, because your work is interesting, are you willing to write a book? When do you want to finish? Maybe in 9 months. Oh, okay, fine. But everybody, when they write a contract, they sign a contract, they are 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, they come in with the book. Okay, so just to know, that is a reality in this field. But if you are an editor of a series, so the publisher comes on your head and said, Adrian, you didn't have enough books in your series. You are not productive. Me productive? I have to convince you and so on and so forth. But you see what kind of responsibility you have. You say, I should give up. But then when we have these far things we have to fill in, how activities of every of us, you have to say, I am the editor of books and things, and that you get credits, for the department or something like this. You get more money from the dean's office or whatever. Say, am I a defender? And what happens? So you have many layers of conflicts. And then you have to solve that with the editor, with your dean, with your chair, and things like that.
Okay, well, we've had a couple of allusions, sort of the business side of publishing, and I know Corey Marsh has put together a couple of handouts, and so before we sort of throw things open to the audience, Corey, would you like to say a few words, what you've got here?
But first I want to say I just thought of a wonderful ironic marketing plan for Bryan.
Really?
Yes, an
Cool.
unmanned Google car that's driving around,
Yeah.
advertising, and
I'll mention that to the publisher.
I think it's irresistible too.
And you have to wait for one more accident.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking the same thing. So one of the things that I wanted to provide you, and we've kind of mentioned this, is when you may want to retain your copyrights or the kind of choices that you need to make about that. So that's why I kind of have that little 3-pager, so you can think in terms of what are your copyrights? What can you possibly lose by giving away your copyright? How much money are you really going to make if you sell that to a commercial entity? How you can negotiate different alternatives or how to retain your rights. So the best advice I give people is when you look at a publishing contract, especially for journal articles, the alternatives are buried. Quite often they're on the next screen, and it's not real easy to know that. So you want to do a lot of consultation and think about what do you need for yourself. Another thing, as you're currently working on publishing, is when you need permissions and how to go about getting those. Let's say that you have an image or a photograph or a table or a figure that you want to use in your work that's from another work. How to contact the copyright holder. Is it going to cost you to reuse it? Usually for educational purposes, especially for your thesis or dissertation, there's rarely a charge for that. And then how you're going to use it and how you're going to give attribution to the other person that provided that. So those are just a few kinds of issues that you want to keep in mind. But that was my intent with the one handout, to remind you of what are your rights with copyright and what are some alternatives, and glad to answer any questions that you might have about that. And I think we'll be following up probably a little bit later as we're maybe talking about open access and what we mean by predatory publishers, but because that can kind of be confusing, I wanted to provide you both with a definition and an outline of kind of a checklist of what should I keep in mind to identify a reputable publisher or an irreputable publisher in this case.
Very good.
But I wanted you to have that in your hands so that you always have that to go back and check with. And we's also going to be putting them on the website. So if there weren't enough copies, there are still a few copies floating around for people who may not have them in the back. But she'll be posting it on the website as well for digital copies.
Okay, well, I think we've had a really nice introductory remarks by our panel members. I would like to ask the audience if you'd like to begin addressing some questions to them, individually or as the group. Please, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I know we were talking about disciplinary norms, and probably my question is for Dr. Pearson. I'm with the English department. Why not publish a book before tenure other than time? I know that was one reason that was mentioned. I kind of share the sentiment that I write because I want to, not because I want to do it for someone else. Are there any other reasons you can think of? I'm not even really interested in tenure right now. I think it's a fascinating piece of advice.
Yeah, I would say no. I mean, I think a book, from a reputable publisher that gets decent reviews, and that's the other thing we were talking about, peer review before. Well, for the kind of books we're talking about, publishing probably, those peer reviews come before maybe, but they also come after. So you have a collection of reviews that you can offer with your book. But I mean, I think if you have a book published with a reputable publisher, just take anyone, Norton or whatever, most institutions are going to, put their imprimatur on that and value that. No, the only thing I can think of is that there's a danger in sometimes books, wrestle you in a different way maybe than an article will, and it might take longer than you think. And then I've just seen people, I've been on tenure committees here where I've seen people go bye-bye. And the reason that they did was because that book they thought we're that close with the publisher, but then it didn't work out, and then they have nothing to show when they're coming up for tenure. And if they worked on articles at the same time, perhaps they would have. It's just a safeguard. And again, back to my experience. My experience was, in a way, probably numbskull experience. I'm not saying follow me. I'm the Pied Piper, because it worked out for me. But maybe other people might want to calculate a little bit more. Here's the other side of that as I talk like the Oracle of Delphi. But calculating too much, the problem with calculating too much is that you end up with this sort of Hessian work, and I don't think that's ever going to be very good. And maybe I'm talking about our discipline here, a little bit more. But I just think you have to be working on something that means something to you. If you don't do that, it's just not going to be, I'm guessing, it's not going to be good work. So I'd rather take my chances with something I'm passionate about. And
I think publishing time versus writing time is an important distinction to make. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Yep. Anything from the ether world?
I just asked, so you might have some questions, but I just wanted to add kind of something for the panelists to talk about. We also see a lot of these opportunities for our graduate students. They're invited, for example, by the faculty member to publish a co-authored book chapter or, an encyclopedia entry while they're working on it in their doctoral curriculum. So what are your thoughts on kind of those opportunities, and what would you advise the students in the room if they're asked by a faculty member or they see kind of that opportunity present itself?
Absolutely.
They're going to speak about this. I'm going to say in English, in creative writing, we're far too narcissistic ever
To share.
Ever to share with the students. So, go, guys.
I would say in the sciences, do it.
Yeah.
And while it's most often in the sciences, most often in psychology, it's not going to be peer reviewed. So it's not going to weight as much as a journal article, and certainly a first author journal article. They're shorter, they're sweeter, they give you an opportunity to extrapolate a little bit without peer review. It gives you exposure to the book market because you're still dealing with contracts and editors, and you get a larger exposure out there to people who aren't reading journals. And our students do it all the time, and it does benefit them when they go on the job market to have that inventory of works, if you will, that range from peer review to book publishing. And some, by the way, just again for the sciences, they're getting grants too. So, they're playing all fields. But if they only do book chapters, they're going to have trouble. If they only do journal articles, there's not going to be in trouble. So still, in the sciences, it's one of those, do it if you can, the opportunity's there, but don't make that your priority.
I think that's the similar kind of advice that we would give in
Yeah.
public administration and policy.
Yeah.
That these are great opportunities, especially not just the outlet, the publication outlet itself, but also the opportunity to collaborate with the faculty member.
Yeah.
But again, you're not going to be successful career-wise, and that's always been your application.
Well, just go back to just using psychology alone now with that particular department I come from. The students do a lot of collaboration with peer review articles with faculty anyway. So they're already working with faculty. What often can happen, though, is that faculty members who get these offers, for whatever reason, they're too busy or they're generous, they'll turn to their grad students and say, do you want to lead it? So for so many grad students, it's an opportunity to get a first author something sometimes more quickly than a journal piece that may require a year and a half of data collection to submit that first paper. So it can be a learning mentorship way for a student to get a first author experience as they're trying to build their data repertoire. But the collaboration, at least in psychology, and I'd say most of the science, is already there anyway. It's just the strategy. What are you trying to accomplish?
Other questions, please.
On that note, similar to a book, I think blogs are becoming really popular. What are your feelings on, I'm in the health sciences, so we have a practitioner portion, and then we also have where our peers, like the PhD level, doctorate. So what are your feelings on writing articles just to get your reputation out there as a PhD student, but also for the clinical side?
I'm the closest to health sciences here. We have a faculty member who actually has one of the top 10 blogs in psychology, I think, out there. If that's all he did, he's very well known for it, he would not have a job right now. Okay? So the blog is certainly maybe become the more modern way of expressing ideas. And he does it very academically, but he's sharing research that people then go read, whether it's his or somebody else's. So he's building a reputation as a gateway. So then the more academic things come to him, he'll be trusted more. He might get more opportunities that way. But the blog in and of itself, at least in the sciences, and I'd argue the health sciences, will not replace peer-reviewed journal articles is the goal. That's it. Until you have tenure. If you do anything before tenure, then you're taking a risk with your time. And by the way, this same faculty member did write a book before he got tenure, and it was a statistics book for business majors. It was very well received. It's about to go into a second edition. But if I recall right, the discussion at tenure did question, did that hurt him in some way? So they began to look at that and go, well, what did he sacrifice by doing that? That was nuts. But he was prolific enough that in the end did not hurt him. But it did give us pause, right? You don't want people to give pause when they're evaluating you for tenure. And again, he was prolific. He was fine. But for someone who doesn't manage his or her time better or fights for something that never comes with the publisher, you're done. You're essentially fired.
Yeah, I've never seen on a graduate certification committee or tenure committee I've never heard anybody utter the word blog.
Yeah.
So I mean that may be something that will change. I think as Bryan is saying, it could certainly give you a platform and create a little bit of a reputation and bring some things your way. But and I think it might be fine. It might be an idea whose time will be coming, but I can't even imagine using that word or invoking that at a meeting where anybody would pay attention to it.
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts related to this. I'm in the management discipline, which is basically an applied discipline of economics and sociology. That's where it comes together, and the applied aspect of management. And like Bryan, in business schools and management departments, I mean, it's peer-reviewed articles, tenure, and I've seen it, both this institution and other institutions say, why would you do anything other than that prior to tenure? But, little nuance here. I do know some people, blogs, social media are kind of a new wrinkle. And it's a big part of the business world right now. And I actually have a colleague in the marketing department who had a blog and was studying social media, and she got some top peer-reviewed publications by exploring that. So if you explore synergies around some of these new technologies, that can be a really clever way. Again, this is very discipline and department specific, but in general, from a management standpoint, you want to prove that you can contribute to the body of knowledge to other management scholars for tenure. For full, you want to have a national reputation, and then you move to a national and international reputation, and blogs, books, other forms of outlets are all part of that national and international reputation building. But again, I hasten to add as colleagues, that's the only thing you do, and you neglect the peer review stuff, you're dead.
Yep.
I was just going to add, I might be older than all of them, but I truly believe that blogs are going to be an acceptable form of publishing in the very near future.
Yeah.
And especially in the health sciences can affect that change, because what you're looking for is immediacy of information. And that's one reason that I think in your profession you have the opportunity to affect that change. Now also, building on what he was just saying, why not create derivative works? I know it's asking for a lot of effort, but if at the same time you're writing articles that are derivatives of what you're posting information about on the blog, you're in the ideal situation if you're building an academic career. The other advice I would tell people, we were talking before about reviews, get your colleagues to post reviews everywhere that match with the academic reviews. So you want a review of your book in your professional society. But at the same time, we have all of these hundreds and hundreds forms of social media. You want everyone you know to post it on Facebook. You want everyone and posting a review. And you want to go for the popular, like Goodreads. I mean, in this day and age, almost every single, not ours, but in many, many institutions, the library catalog is posting Goodreads reviews of every single book. And that just makes you more worldwide visible. So you're building a world reputation.
Did you have something online?
I was going to add, we've talked a lot of this conversation we've had is about tenure. But I think one thing that we do want to think about, what you want to think about as graduate students is we also have an intermediate next step of getting hired, right? Being successful in the job market. And sometimes, search committees are not always cutting edge. And as search committees, we're kind of old school faculty. Right? We're kind of old school faculty, and we don't always know how to evaluate these blogs. So we might look at this candidate, and one person has 3 publications, the other has 3. We might not see the increment of value. I think educational-wise and thinking, thinking ahead, the faculty search committees aren't as sophisticated yet. So I'm not saying don't do it, but you also want to think about how is that going to be seen if you think about your intermediate outcomes with tenure as well. Tenure is important.
Yeah.
Getting a job is that step to get you closer.
It should be the gateway. And a lot of us write technical reports and white papers and grant reports that go on our Vita that we do share publicly, but they don't help us get tenure either. They form the basis of what we do write for peer review, what does become the basis of a book. So we're constantly writing more than most of you will ever know we've written. And that's also the reality. So blog away to provide maybe a form for your own head to get clear, right, on what you really want to say. Make those connections. But I would never, at least, and I am old school but around a long time, I would never treat a blog as equivalent to a journal, peer-reviewed journal article. Probably not until the day I die. No offense to the 21st century.
Okay, Adrian, what you...
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting discussion. I'm going to tell you a discussion I had maybe 48 hours ago with a young fellow, working on IT and things like this, and he brought a discussion related indirectly to social media, to blogs, to Facebook, and so on, and he put it from a business perspective. Said Facebook, all of a sudden it was evaluated $42 billion. Why? Twitter, it became more like this. And now, he said, I think on the market, they will lose so much in evaluation because they were not right in who is going to be the next president. And I think that will lose a lot, People said even in NSA, how do you look on everybody's life and you don't see that hidden things somebody else is going, and you put the president to go to expose himself for one approach versus another approach, and I think living in stock exchanges and things like this, very soon things will be reevaluated. So is that true that all these things on the market, on the exchange market, put it that way, are going to be solid? Because people in the future, CEOs, he said, why should I follow what this? Because I see that there are hidden things, which all these things, they don't really capture. And in the end, because of totally different philosophy and demography, whatever, I don't have the right words, whatever it was written on blogs, and then we try to investigate through big data, say, candidates number A, it will be the winner. And later on he said, what happened? How we didn't know about that? Why we did not capture of this? Because it was blogs positivistic. They were not positive. They were positivistic retroactively, post factum. Now you say, and if you put it in a business way, they might really lose a lot of value on the market, Facebook, the other one, because people say, why should I invest in you? Because, it was not what you keep telling me, even if you have millions of people behind, they don't understand. So that is in other words, all these blogs are peer-reviewed, so to speak, right? And even a peer-reviewed paper at this scale said, it disappointed me.
Yeah.
Sorry, I try to make these comparison things, but what some young generation try to say, do I trust now in Facebook and all this?
Hey, anybody wants to be a psychologist, the future's great, man. We got a lot of work to do in methodology, measurement, sampling, polling, statistics. This is the decade of psychology coming up.
I think so, because some of the reports this week of trying to understand this phenomena of what happened is that people are admitting they lied to the pollsters. Mm-hmm. And the psychology of what was going into that will be extremely interesting. And if you want to research it, I'm deadly interested. Because I just think it's fascinating that the misinformation is based on people not telling the truth because they were afraid to tell the truth. And that is fascinating.
That's been happening for decades.
For decades.
It affected
a lot of things this week, including my stocks on Tuesday night.
Yeah, but you are right, but this is a global phenomenon.
Oh, yeah.
I live in different. Sometimes I said, it doesn't matter where you are in Moscow, in Paris, in Washington. It's the same way of approaching things. Somebody said there are 10 big capitals in the world, but only in one of them decisions are being taken. So you see how this, and now people post factum, they jump and sing like this. The biggest winner is media, television. I can see the television. Now, they still have advertising, and now they speak differently. And me, as an idiot, I listen to them. Good. So what is the problem?
This is our next book.
But I want to go back to your question over there. Your question. And think 15 years ago, nobody would have accepted in a tenure decision, I don't think, an online article. That's changed. So certainly, you publish in a good journal. It's exclusively online. I think lots of places will accept that and would value it if you were in the hiring process, but that wouldn't have been the case 15 years ago. So times changed, and
Building on what Corey and Mike are saying, I think what I see is a lot of publishers are going the way of newspapers, and eventually they're all going to go out of business. And what's going to be left in their place is social media. So I see in your careers, social media is probably going to play a bigger and bigger role. But historically, it's been non-existent. But I see it playing a much bigger role in the future.
But the question for peer review will go.
I was going to ask a question about, let's say you wrote a nice paper, but you don't want to send it to a conference, you don't want to send it to a journal. You want to publish on your online somewhere, either Facebook. So how are you going to protect that ownership? How do you know that somebody else will come up and say, hey, I wrote that before?
Right.
The minute you put something in a fixed form, you have copyrighted it. No matter what. If you choreograph a dance, you should video it because you need to put it into a fixed form. But the minute you write a blog, the minute you post something anywhere, you are... There's a difference. As of 1976, copyright is immediate. As soon as I wrote something down on a napkin, I own the copyright. So that is your personal protection, but you cannot take legal action unless you have registered a copyright officially. That's when you can take someone for legal action. So if you want to protect your work legally, then you need to register a copyright with the Copyright Office, and I gave you the web address.
Painful procedure or is this short?
It used to be extremely painful to register copyright. I can remember in the 90s, I can remember occasions where it was taking up to 26 months to register a copyright. And I honestly can't remember the current price. Somewhere probably between $60 and $80. But for a personal copyright. The time has really shut down because we all assume this kind of protection. The kinds of things that have come up in question are usually occasions where some photographer has taken nude photos of a scarlet and she doesn't have the copyright and he hasn't filed for the copyright and they're trying to hurry up and get into court. So somebody's trying to file for a copyright. But those are the kinds of things that you want to take into account. And the important thing that will change our world, I think, during the next couple of years, next year is the anniversary of reviewing copyright. And there's some really evil things going on in the U.S. government trying to shut that down. Surprisingly, the new Librarian of Congress has only been in office for 3 months, and her first order of business was to fire the head of the U.S. Copyright Office. So there are huge controversies surrounding U.S. copyright right now. So it'll be very interesting times when they figure out who's going to be in charge of these transactions. And there's a lot of difference of opinions if you talk to people in intellectual property in the Commerce Department, like my immediate family, and people in publishing. And so each one of us has a different element of our interest in that. But it'll be real interesting beginning next year when the U.S. copyright comes under review.
Excellent.
You all didn't know that, did
Are there
you?
any questions? Louise, anything coming from our online audience? Or?
No.
Okay.
Got a question.
Go ahead.
Question, yeah.
As I'm starting to do lit review, I'm seeing more and more journals are coming up, things like PLOS One, in health sciences. But what are the thoughts of these open access online journals compared to some of the more traditional publications? Are they seeing the same weight?
They're highly cited, they're highly weighted, they have huge H indexes, they work very, very hard at establishing that reputation. But as Chris and I can tell you, was it molecular biology? There was a Biomed Central journal that Chris wanted to publish in last year. And we don't really have enough return here at ODU to pay for a membership. There's not enough to go into that $15,000, $20,000, whatever that costs. And then this whole dilemma for the individual researcher that wants to make their article open access is usually asked to pay extra charges.
Hundreds of dollars.
Hundreds,
thousands in some
thousands.
cases.
I mean, it's a minimum of $1,500 to $3,000. And
let me piggyback on that.
Yes,
Where I see authors do it, and most journals now will have options to go open or stay traditional, and there are some pure open. But even those that have options, it's the author who pays the bill.
right.
And so unless you have a federal grant, and a lot of U.S. federal grants now have requirements for access and so forth, and they let you budget that, then you as an average author, unless you're just independently wealthy, you're not going to do it. Or and I have heard of some universities.
Can I advocate for Chris and I?
Yeah.
If there are more and more institutions, this hasn't taken effect here, but Virginia Tech, for example, a couple of years ago, they started out with probably about $45,000 given to them by the university administration, and all people on campus, all students and faculty, could compete with that funding support so that they could create an open access article. The reason I'm an advocate of that open access article, it's not going to hurt your tenure in any way because you're publishing in a peer-reviewed journal. But the reason I advocate it is you're going to make your article so much more visible worldwide, globally, because of the web. And so it's a wonderful opportunity if you can find that support in order to take those options. I strongly recommend it.
Yeah,
I just wanted to add, since we're talking about paying when you're submitting, there's also another element to pay when you submit, where there are some journals that actually charge a submission fee. And that's different from a book.
We're not.
That's usually like $200 or $300. And that actually, I think, is might be a little bit more unique to engineering, management, and public service, where you actually pay, $200 as a submission fee for each one. It doesn't guarantee publication, but my experience has been that because they're actually, in some shape or form, compensating reviewers and have much more professional boards, the process is a lot smoother, and your manuscript comes out in publication, if it's accepted, a lot quicker. So there are upsides to paying a submission fee, but again, what faculty member has $400?
Yeah, but when you're talking $1,500 to $3,000,
some of the big ones, yeah, they're very
and
pricey.
the reason this is controversial is that, generally speaking, that's probably a journal that our library is paying $8,000 to $15,000 for every year. So we call it double dipping because our institution has paid for that journal already. We're paying for a subscription. And now, in order for you to have an open access article, although it's wonderful because you're giving that article to the world. So it's a very difficult situation. In fact, I was at a conference last week and they had an hour-long debate to directors from huge research institutions in the country. And it was totally two different opinions. And to me, if institutions that seem to have the money, like Virginia Tech, are taking advantage of paying those fees for authors because they want to make that investment in open information.
Adrian had a comment, please.
Yeah, I think the discussion is extremely interesting, and I appreciate a lot what you are saying, and what you come with blog and things. I will give a quotation from Alvin Toffler. Alvin Toffler is a very well-known futurologist. I don't know that. He said recently that illiterate people on the 21st century will be not those who are not able to read or write. There will be people who will not be able to learn, to unlearn, and relearn. So what we are talking, all these currents and things like that, they go into this paradigm. You have to learn new things, and I like the way you ask questions, but then you have to unlearn things, tenure. Maybe we have to unlearn the tenure mechanism. I exaggerate, but maybe. And to relearn.
I'm teasing.
Yeah. Right.
He just said that.
And to relearn, which is, and I had some discussion with some friends and colleagues who are not in the academia, from Europe, from France. And when the person started to translate that in French, he said, unlearn means to forget? No, it's not. But in French, it's like that. So, it's not exactly that. So, unlearn is not the equivalent things in French.
How about adapt?
I don't know. Yeah, but I'm telling what Toffler mentioned because it sounds interesting. Learn, unlearn, relearn. What is relearn? That is also an interesting. And I think young generation, you and so on, might be in this Bermuda Triangle, and you have no evasion. You are staying in that.
So we've been talking about you have an idea and you want to contribute to the body of knowledge, and where does it go? That's kind of a theme, and the focus here is specifically on books. And the focus here is about maybe getting that first job and getting tenure because you're all young scholars. Just to flesh this out, though, and I can speak to this for business schools, there's a lot of craziness around this whole publication thing within business schools. The top 25 business schools in the United States, the general standard for getting tenure is not only not journals versus books versus blogs, it's publications in number of 7 publications. So departments say these 7 peer-reviewed publications, you need to publish 1 a year in each of these in order to earn tenure. And they tell you what the 7 are. So the point I want to bring out is, I think that's insane. But the thinking behind that is because these journals are the ones that everybody reads, looks at, and whatnot, and we get ranked around that, and so rankings have a huge impact about what comes out. There's tremendous pressure. I did a sabbatical over in Europe. There's a thing called the FT list, the FT 45. If you publish any article in the FT list in the major European universities, there's a $10,000 bonus in your salary. And so that focuses attention real quickly when you do things like that. I don't think that's good for scholarship, but there's this whole thing around rankings. And in terms of getting jobs, if you're in a European, if you want to get a job in a European business school, you damn well better have published on the Financial Times Top 45 list, because that's going to contribute to their ranking. So the point on all this is the field, I think, is way too narrow, certainly on peer review, and that takes it out even from the subject of non-peer review things like books and other things. So I just want to point out, again, come back to this point is, you shouldn't blindly follow the norms of your discipline, but you really need to know what they are, and then make your choices. And I agree completely with Mike. You must, at the end of the day, you got to be passionate about what you're doing, but don't be passionate without knowing when you're deviating from the norms of your discipline. It's really important to know those norms, and then make your choices.
I think you are mentioning here the way how it is in Europe and things like that.
Well, U.S. too.
No. It's very good. No problem. But I want to complement what you are saying. In other words, know where you go, know your environment. I am discussing a lot with high-level academia from Delft University of Technology, which is one of the best, at least in Europe. And when they evaluate somebody from tenure or something like this, they said, did you publish in the journals where our library has a subscription?
Wow.
That's the way they are looking. They say if you publish in the journals where because it's not coming like that, it costs a lot of money. But they said, I think that is important because then in the end we promote university. Otherwise we promote H-index. Where is the H-index? Somewhere in the clouds. Where is ISI? Somewhere in a business company, because this business for them is nothing else. Maybe sometimes they will be going to be sweet, to go to the things because they kill a life of people, things and so on. It came like that. ISI, Francis, I don't know what. What for? Who gives you this freedom to take this? Is a Supreme Court things or where, right? So, but I'm not going beyond. That's the discussion. But Delft, they really appreciate the publications of people in journals where the libraries subscribe to them. You have to know where you go. If you apply to Delft, you better look into whatever,
I just want to add a footnote to this, and what you're saying is be practical, and I get all that, and it makes perfect sense. But I remember when I was sort of in your position, I was in my 20s, and sort of at the beginning of working on my PhD, and I can still see this New Yorker cartoon. 2 sort of curmudgeonly looking professors staring at a announcement board, and on the announcement board was an obituary, and the little bubble said, "Poor Foster, published published perished anyway. So just we all die anyway. Is what I'm saying. So might as well live happily.
I was going to add the verso is also true. As the collection officer, I quite often get asked, predominantly by engineering, are you buying the journals where we publish? And so that's also a very interesting question. And just to let you know, I've actually run those studies from the citation indexes. And we do cover the top 100 journals where our faculty publish, except for one, and that's the SPIE. We have because that optical organization is so interdisciplinary. We have faculty across disciplines publishing in their proceedings, and it is fairly expensive, and it isn't something that we've explored before. But I did find it very interesting that this very interdisciplinary organization, where many of our faculty are publishing, is something that we don't provide firsthand.
Yeah, please.
It's kind of picking up on a theme that you guys have talked about with tenure and almost waiting until your tenure to do more outside the box publications, not just articles. But in order to get tenure, is it beneficial to not just do some of the peer review, but also do some, an engineer, do some of the technical reports and white papers to build up your funding and increase your funding so that you're getting more of that world national recognition, so you're becoming recognized as an expert? Does that balance, or does that help, or should it strictly just try and get those peer review journals published?
Well, we're all looking at you to answer.
Yes, you see, when I came here 10 years ago, I was very shocked to see, how we are accepting research projects. If it's $1 million research project and that is how to clean the room for $1 million, why not? It's money. When I was in Switzerland, ETH Zurich, I remember that we've got $500,000, whatever, research, and with Swiss Reinsurance Company, one of the biggest. And the vice president of research of ETH, he said, Adrian, usually I would not sign this contract because it's not scientific enough. It doesn't go to the level of Nobel Prize because they have 21 Nobel Prizes and things like that. But because we have a good relationship with Swiss Re, okay, I sign it, okay? So for some university, the money is not everything. For us, it doesn't matter if you clean the room or whatever. I exaggerate a little bit, but I try to give an answer to your question to some extent, okay? Said, this contract is $500,000 or something like this. Maybe other contracts are small, 20, 30,000, and they are lucrative contracts. And so you say, if you review for tenure, because I had the case, said, this person should not be tenured in your department. Somebody said from an elevated university. I was chair. I said, thank you. I listened to you, but I think she's contributing a lot to our. Yes, even if they are small quantums, but I think that she will be promoted. And that things what you are asking about, peer reviews, things, is just. It's a process. It's to be or not to be. That is the question.
Well, and just to kind of follow up on that, and again, from the sciences perspective, I think you guys too, science's tenure and promotion is linked to the external reviewers. So the golden rule is, if your external reviewers like you, odds are good you're getting tenure. If they don't, and that could be one bad letter out of 4, you're going to have trouble. And they are not given your technical reports. They are not given your grants. They are given your vita, maybe your research statement, and your peer-reviewed articles. And that's, at least in the sciences, I guess you guys as well, that is what they review. And they will ignore your teaching, except maybe to say, teaching helped or hurt. They're going to ignore everything else but that body of work. And if you don't convince those 4 people, that you're worth keeping here at ODU or wherever you are, you've got a rough couple of months after that moment.
Yeah, they only see your research, I think, in
Yeah.
arts and letters.
Yeah.
So,
again, across the board then. So, yeah, write the technical report, get the money, get the grants, and they'll know you've brought in money. They'll be happy you brought in money, but that's not what they're reviewing. That's not what they're reading.
one of the ironies, and maybe the not-so-secret secrets about academia and tenure, is that we're evaluated based upon 3 criteria: research, service, and publication. Publication,
Teaching research.
teaching, right? But it's really only research, and I can't believe I said that out loud. It's going out to some.
It's true.
Wow. But I mean, basically, that's it. I mean, that doesn't mean that you can be a horrible teacher, but I think you can be an average teacher at best, and a great researcher, or your publications are terrific, and you're going to get tenure. So,
but you can be the best teacher in the world, and your research is not up to a frequency of the norm, or the external reviewers have an issue with it, and you'll be asked to leave the university.
correct.
And also in these letters, you expect from the peer reviewer, you as a chair or whatever, you have to write specifically. You don't have to tell me that person should be promoted or not in your department or in your school.
Right.
So we don't care if it will be promoted in, MIT or something. Tell me, what do you think exactly, as our colleague says? That it's a lottery sometimes.
Right.
Yeah. Well, listen, folks, we're getting near the end of our allotted time. I did want to give Corey Marsh just a minute to talk about what we call now predatory publishing, what seems to be ripe for discussion, particularly in the digital world, but probably elsewhere as well. So, Corey, could you take us through your handout quickly, and then people can contact you later if they want more details?
Absolutely. They have my contact information as well. But I have a quick question of you. You're the future faculty in the world. How many of you, after listening to some of this talk, are inclined to or motivated to try to change some of these traditions in publishing and tenure? Is anyone kind of inclined to question it and want to advocate some changes? Sorry, I needed to know that. I wanted to know that that's how we change things. We get new traditions by questioning, well, we've always done it this way, and we've all done it this way for 30 years. And now there's a new rising faculty, and I would encourage you to question things and to, maybe you want to get that job. So as we said, her advice is excellent, and then able to look at new alternatives. So the reason that we wanted to address predatory publishing was in this world of open access models and online publishing, just like everything else in our lives, there's these predatory people who are taking advantage. And so it's gotten even more complicated, because besides contacting you as graduate students, they will also, they've branched out, and they now have predatory conferences. So they'll be inviting you to a conference that has a name that's very similar to the SPIE, and you're intrigued, but then when you check it out, you find out there hasn't been a history or evidence, or people know about it. So just as with everything in protecting your bank account, protect your publishing reputation, and be sure to explore that publisher and ask other people, and use this checklist as a measure of how honest is this publisher. A colleague of mine whose wife used to be in the biology department and is now more of a full-time artist, it's been at least a number of years since she's been a biology professor. And even most recently, she was contacted by predatory publishers. They're desperate for authors. And so name lists and directories are where they're gathering information from and trying to contact people. As I said, it all comes down to being desperate for authors. And I wanted to give you this information so that you can go straight to this list at any time and keep that handy for your career, so that you go right to scholarlyoa.com/publishers, because that list is always kept up to date as people report predatory publishers, so it's your best source for questioning things.
Hey, Corey, I'm just going to interject just briefly. I know in our department in biology, when we review people for tenure and promotion, people are spotting these predatory published black journals, as I call them. And there's no blame attached to the faculty member, but nonetheless, it kind of clouds the discussion a bit. Would this have been published in a legit journal? And the poor faculty member had no clue. You got a bill for $1,000 and a publication nobody cares about.
And honestly,
really
it's
dangerous.
the business colleges that offer the cleanest system. As he was saying, it's very restrictive. You have these 7, and honestly, in business, it's not just the list of the 7 titles. They actually have these charts that have them marked with A+. It's really kind of funny, isn't it? But at least it's a very straightforward system where you know exactly where you're expected to publish, and there's no questions about it. So what I advise people is to do exactly what you're doing in this room. Use your faculty and your colleagues as your mentors, and question these things so that you make sure that you're following the right.
Great, thank you. Any last input or comments from the WebEx people or not?
The WebEx group is fairly quiet today.
Okay.
So that either means we've had a really lively conversation and everybody was very clear, or it could be the opposite. But before, if we don't have any questions in room audience, could I just ask kind of the panelists when you give one piece of advice for the graduate students in the room, and you think about kind of taking on your author hat, putting on your journal article reviewer hat, editor hat. Kind of what one piece of advice would you give to the students in the room?
I'll start. You've gotten lots of advice from me in the last 10 minutes, but there's one more thing as an editor that I want to encourage you. If you're not a good writer, would you please go learn how to become one? Because if you want to publish, and this comes from being an editor, I will tell you the truth. Last year, I rejected 3 research articles in a peer-reviewed journal because of how they were written. It had nothing to do, it had very little to do with questioning their research methods or their hypothesis. It had to do with how they wrote it. It was so bad that I knew the editor had no time to rewrite every sentence in these papers. So in 2 cases, I invited that they resubmit if they went and rewrote. And one group of authors actually did. They spent an entire year. They obviously got assistance. They were, English was not their first language, but they obviously went and got assistance and submitted a fairly well-written article. Very, very little needed to be edited. So I know that's a real snob of me, but it's my biggest pet peeve is not receiving information that's well-written.
Okay. Bryan, would you?
Yeah, I mean that's the number one reason we desk reject papers, and so the good side is there's lots of opportunities to publish. The bad side is we're getting slammed with exponentially increased submissions to journals. So we're having to reject more because otherwise we'll drown. So if you don't write well, we're not going to take time on it, period. We're going to desk reject it because we're not going to burden our reviewers. We're just not going to. That is great advice. So to follow up with that, my one piece comes from a fortune cookie. And I collect fortune cookies and I stick them to my monitor to kind of remind me of things that I forget about myself in life. And one of my favorite is writing is a craft. It's a craft. So if you want to publish, you have to write a lot. Carry a journal around. Write notes to yourself. Blog. Go for it. Write technical reports. Write in a diary. Write. Write a lot of emails because it's a craft. And it's a craft that you have to learn. Drives me nuts when students think they can write a paper in 24 hours before the deadline. It drives me nuts when professionals think that they can just sit and write something for a meeting the next day, and I'm guilty. It's a craft. So if you want to get good, and by the way, if you're not good, you will not survive. We're lucky, guys. You know, I often joke, we have gotten tenure now compared to when we got tenure. So the competition's increasing, the volume is increasing, the skill levels are increasing. You have to be better, probably better than any one of us at this table.
Okay.
It's a craft.
Mike, how about yours?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly will underscore the craft and focus on your writing and all that, but I'll just give you the same advice I gave to my sons when they started their dating life, and that is just balance passion with common sense.
There you go.
Yeah, let me build on that. I mean, a theme I've mentioned tonight is really know the norms in your profession. And practically, the way you find about the norms of the first job is your faculty that train you. And the way you learn about the norms of tenure is when you go on the job thing, you learn about you. It's very common and expected that you ask, what gets rewarded here in the way of research? So find out about those norms. The mistake a lot of young scholars make, though, is they doggedly, through lack of self-confidence, just pursue those norms. For me, the more I've written for myself and less for others, ironically, the more productive I've been. And so don't forget Mike's absolutely right. You need to, my point is know the norms, but then follow your passion. And this career really allows you to do that. But my urging is don't make it just passion, ignoring the norms, and don't be just about norms, ignoring your passion. It's both.
Thanks. And Adrian, you want to finish?
Yeah, so I was listening carefully, everybody said, and I fully agree with everything. Now, I had just 2 microseconds to think what I'm going to say. It brought to my mind, a Hollywood movie said, follow your instincts. Follow your instincts. You said many things, but you said it, follow whatever, passion. I said, follow your instincts. Write on blog, write a thing, but follow your instincts because I cannot stop you.
Well, thank you very much, panel. Appreciate it.